Hi class, welcome to class 2 of Public Administration Theory. And as discussed, we'll be looking at examining political systems for this particular class. And we're looking at 3 required readings and 1 recommended reading, in addition to the reading that you have on Blackboard, which is also recommended. So I'd suggest you skim through it, but you don't have to read it. So, at the end of today's class, you'll have a better understanding of the interlinking ideas that connect political science and public administration, and what is exactly the role of a bureaucracy or the public administration apparatus, and what should it ideally do in a political system. So, we come across a few readers and a few scholars and practitioners in this particular class. Waldo being one of the most influential, and of course we had Goodnow and we had others who had their perspectives on how should the executive, the judiciary, and the bureaucracy, how should they work together, and what are the ways to manifest or rather resolve the tensions that manifest themselves in this intricate relationship. So before we do much, I'd like you to do this since this is online. So pause this video and on a piece of paper jot down what political science means to you. And it's okay if you don't know the actual definition, but write down whatever you think it means. What is it a study of, and what does it include, obviously, and what does it exclude? So jot down this on a piece of paper. Take a few minutes, and at the same time, after you're done with this, jot down the same response but for public administration. So what is it a study of, what does it include, and what does it exclude, and how do you think they're different, like what makes them different? So this is your perception of both the fields. It doesn't have to be an accurate or definite answer. So just to understand where you stand today, and hopefully by the end of this class and by the end of this course, you'll have a much deeper and more critical response to offer when anybody asks you this question. So also jot down how do you think they're different, like what makes them distinctive. So once you're done with this exercise, let's move on to understanding Dwight Waldo's thesis in his book, The Administrative State, which was a very influential book, as I mentioned earlier, and which really sought to clarify the relationship between political theory and public administration. So the divide between theory and practice. And what he essentially argued, the core of his argument in his book, is that there isn't a lot of difference between between theory and practice, because a lot of the decisions that are made, even though they may seem practical, are they're laden with value and laden with theoretical implications, because people don't act in vacuum, right? People are led by their own personal moral values, religious values, and at the same time there is a bias sometimes for people to think that political science is somehow superior to administration, which is basically the carrying out of the will of politicians and appointed officials. But he says there is no such distinction, and it's really public administration is a part of political science, or rather the framework itself. And he also says that there is nowadays over reliance on business organization and development theories in public administration, which I briefly touched upon in the introductory class. And he argues that that's not a good thing. So he says the over reliance on management aspects like efficiency or doing things effectively is not always the best part of administration, because it might lead to, for instance, greater efficiencies might lead to less democratic participation, because if you're trying to get a decision made quickly, which means that you might not be including all perspectives, you might not be including all the people that are involved in a particular instance, and that might leave people out. So there's always a trade-off in his perspective. So very, very important thesis, very important book. So I'd encourage you to look up this book and also read it at your leisure. But I think this article does a decent job of introducing his particular ideas in this book. So again, time for a short video. I want you to pause and use the link of provided here of a short discussion with Sheldon Wolin, a very influential political theorist, and look at what he has to say about politics and the need for control, the need for almost an authoritarian drive for control that we are witnessing in many parts of the world today. So I think this is a good discussion, even though it's very short. So pause this video again and watch this short video. And once you're done, now let's move on to Goodnow's discussion in the article in the book provided. And we have a discussion as well that you will be writing about online. But I've basically summarized the key points that he's made here. And essentially, Goodnow is saying that there is a need for differentiation of powers between the administrative, judicial, and legislative and bureaucracy. However, he says it's impossible to sometimes make this differentiation. So they have to work in tandem. And his argument is also that sometimes the executive has to be subordinate to the legislature or political system for it to function smoothly. So in that respect, I think he's in a small way harking back to Confucius and sort of the more traditional or conservative way of thinking about about administrative apparatus and what the political system does. And he says, given the nature of American democracy, which is a representative democracy, the executive must be subordinate to the political system. So think about what he means by this and how this is playing out in today's context, whether at the state and local government or the federal government level, and what you make of his arguments. And this is the final article that was assigned, which is basically about the role of the president in today's, again, the administrative and the political system. And the time that this was written, I think there was a lot of discussion on the role of the president, the need for better organization of the president's office itself. And these debates to some extent are still ongoing, as we can see, even with current administrations, again at the state and as well as federal level. And these haven't been settled completely, though there has been some improvement in terms of where we are today. I don't think I had assigned this reading, so you can skip this slide. So essentially, what we are seeing today is a real tension between the kind of rational, or rather the very definitive answers that a bureaucrat is supposed to have, yes and no, this is right and wrong, versus your normative or value-laden decisions that one makes as a bureaucrat, as Dwight Waldo would argue. So across the spectrum, whether you're a nonprofit leader or whether you're a public manager, you will come across situations or contexts where you will need to make those value-laden normative decisions. And I think that's something that one has to keep in mind and has to be aware that all answers are not written in a rule book, right? Because much of bureaucracy is also about interpreting those decisions and implementing them in a manner that fits the law, but at the same time it always has some value-laden component to it, which means that there is a need for discussion, deliberation, and other sort of discursive strategies that people have to be involved, that all the stakeholders need to have somewhat of a say if you're making life-changing decisions about those people, and these cannot be made in vacuum. So I hope you enjoyed the short video, and please do answer the 2 discussion questions included, and email me if you have any questions. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next week. Thank you.